Did the CIA create the hippies? Was rocker Jim Morrison a secret, deep cover military intelligence agent working for his father, Admiral George Stephen Morrison, architect of the Gulf of Tonkin incidents, used as a pretext for the Vietnam War, to discredit the burgeoning anti-war movement by associating it with his drugged-out hippie fans? Did the CIA manufacture the hippie movement in 1965 in Laurel Canyon in Los Angeles, secretly summoning Morrison and other musicians from around the world and stage managing the hippie movement from the secret Lookout Mountain facility in Laurel Canyon? Did the hippies make fools of themselves, or did the CIA make them do it? This is the thesis of Dave McGowan's Weird Seeds Inside the Canyon, Laurel Canyon, Covert Ops, and the Dark Heart of the Hippie Dream, published in 2014. The poster child for this theory is Jim Morrison of The Doors, surprisingly the son of Rear Admiral George Stephen Morrison, who commanded the U.S. fleet in the infamous and controversial Gulf of Tonkin incidents in August of 1964, which provided the pretext for a massive increase in the U.S. involvement in Vietnam, flooding the small Southeast Asian nation with U.S. troops in 1965. Yes, Jim Morrison really was the son of Admiral Morrison. A number of other key figures in the folk rock revolution / Laurel Canyon music scene were sons of career military officers, including John Phillips of the Mamas and Papas, Frank Zappa, Graham Parsons of the Byrds, and Stephen Stills of Buffalo Springfield. David McGowan, 1960 to 2015, no relation, presents the birth of the 1960 folk rock revolution as follows. All these folks gathered nearly simultaneously along the narrow, winding roads of Laurel Canyon. They came from across the country, although the Washington, D.C. area was noticeably overrepresented, as well as from Canada and England, and in at least one case, all the way from Nazi Germany. They came even though, at the time, there was no music industry in Los Angeles. They came even though, at the time, there was no live music scene to speak of. They came even though, in retrospect, there was no discernible reason for them to do so. Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon returns to this theme several times in the book, and in most of the many interviews David McGowan did on the book in 2014, between its publication and his death. This thesis is demonstrably false. There was a sizable music industry in Los Angeles in the 1958 to 1965 period, including the Southern California icon Capitol Records, founded in 1942. Capitol Records was the label for the Kingston Trio, who launched the so-called folk music revival in 1958 with their hit Tom Dooley. The author mentions Capitol at least 3 times in the book. Other LA record labels included Liberty Records from 1955 to 1971, Dot Records, relocated to LA in 1956, Arwen Records, late 1950s to mid-1960s, Dunhill Records from 1964 to 67, Warner Records, founded in 1958, and GNP Crescendo Records from 1954 to the present. There was a sizable live music scene as well, including several nightclubs such as Doug Weston's Troubadour, opened in 1957, that specialized in folk music. The author mentions the famous Troubadour Club at least 5 times. Other live folk music venues at the time included Pandora's Box, founded about 1958 and closed in 1966, and Ed Pearl's The Ash Grove, from 1958 all the way to 1973. There were many reasons for musicians, particularly folk musicians, to relocate to the Los Angeles area in the 1960s. The folk music revival of the late 1950s, sparked by the Kingston Trio's hit Tom Dooley, Reminder, Capitol Records, sparked folk music clubs and records all over the United States and indeed the world. A large fraction of the Laurel Canyon musicians were struggling or moderately successful in the folk music scenes of New York, Greenwich Village area, such as John Phillips and Cass Elliot of the Mamas and Papas, Toronto, Neil Young and Joni Mitchell, Cambridge, the Harvard-Boston area, Kansas City, many other areas. There is a long history in the United States of people rebooting or trying to reboot a failed or stagnant career by heading west, especially to California. Southern California could offer balmy weather, beaches, and scantily clad members of the opposite sex, as well as proximity to the glamorous movie industry and a long history of tolerance for bohemians and other oddballs compared to much of the country. California was not nearly as expensive in the 50s and early 60s as it is today. Hundreds of musicians, both famous and not so famous, lived in and around Laurel Canyon in the late 1960s into the 70s. An obvious explanation for the presence of ex-military kids like Jim Morrison, which Dave McGowan acknowledged in many of his interviews, is rebellion against their presumably strict military upbringing. Military officers are often stereotyped as distant or even abusive fathers who try to run their family like a military unit, an often unsuccessful method. Dave McGowan argued that while this could explain an excess of military kids, all of the Laurel Canyon musicians were from military or military intelligence families, or, in some interviews, all military or super rich families. Graham Parsons of the Byrds was apparently both. However, many of the musicians Dave McGowan mentions, or even devotes entire chapters to, did not have obvious military families. For example, although John Phillips of the Mamas and Papas father was a retired Marine Corps officer, bandmates Cass Elliot, born Naomi Cohen, her father, ran a lunch wagon business for construction workers in the Baltimore area. Denny Doherty's father was a dock worker in Nova Scotia in Canada, and Michelle Phillips, born Gilliam, her father was an L.A. County probation officer who had served in the military probably during or around World War II. Weird Scenes features a Laurel Canyon death list of drug overdoses, suspicious accidents, purported suicides, and clear murders in and around the Laurel Canyon. The book connects Laurel Canyon to many scandals and crimes, mostly in the LA area, and in some cases alleges ties to various organized crime figures. The book manages to pull in everything from the death of stage magician and escape artist Houdini, who lived in Laurel Canyon for a while, the Black Dahlia murder in 1947, the Tate LaBianca, the Manson murders, and the so-called Wonderland murders in July of 1981, well after the Laurel Canyon music scene had peaked. Most of this has little to do with military intelligence or the CIA on the surface. The Sunset Strip, home to the nightclubs associated with the Laurel Canyon folk rock revolution music scene, has a long and shady history. The Pandora's Box Coffee House / nightclub, which operated from about 1958 to 1966, which specialized specifically in folk music, was located at 8118 Sunset Boulevard, about 1.5 miles from the Houdini estate in Laurel Canyon, only about 4 to 8 minutes by car on Mondays today at 8:30 a.m., the rush hour. The Sunset Strip started out as an unincorporated region connecting Beverly Hills to the west and Hollywood to the east, with lax law enforcement. In the 1920s, it became home to nightclubs, speakeasies, strip clubs, and other dubious operations, often associated with the gangsters of the Prohibition era, such as Bugsy Siegel, a pattern generally agreed to have continued up to at least the 1950s. A number of nightclubs in the 50s and 60s were associated with Mickey Cohen, Siegel's infamous successor. In conclusion, it is impossible at present to rule out the thesis of weird scenes inside the canyon, but the case presented is weak. There was a vibrant music industry in LA in the late 1950s and early 60s. There was a vibrant live music scene in LA dating back at least to the Sunset Strip of the 1920s. There were many reasons for folk musicians in particular to move to Los Angeles and Laurel Canyon near the live music venues in the mid-1960s. Many of the Laurel Canyon musicians had negligible family or personal ties to the military intelligence, or the CIA. Several, most notably Jim Morrison, did have such ties, which might make one wonder. The scandals, crimes, and various shady goings-on associated with Laurel Canyon and with the Laurel Canyon music scene probably reflect organized crime involvement in nightclubs and the music business dating back to the 1920s rather than some larger intelligence community plot. You can find out more about weird scenes inside the canyon and the Laurel Canyon music scene in our review of weird scenes inside the canyon. This concludes this video presentation. If you like this video, please click like. Please click subscribe and the notification bell if you would like to receive more content from us. You can avoid internet censorship by subscribing directly to our RSS news feed. Please consider sharing the link by email and on your website or blog, in addition to liking, upvoting, or sharing on increasingly censored, advertising beholden, big company social media. We have encountered such censorship. Mathematical software is developing algorithms and software to automate data analysis, reducing the risks of costly errors and increasing the predictive power of the results. You can support our work financially by subscribing on our Patreon page, https://www.patreon.com/mathsoft, or scanning the QR code in the lower right corner.